Hey, Steve here, and welcome back to another episode in my Processing Subscriber Images series of videos. Today's image was sent in to me by Victor Tafoya, and I'll pop the image just up on the corner of the screen here somewhere. The image that he sent in to me was exposed very much to the right, so that's great. We've got the one raw file to be working with. However, when I look at this, I think this is an image that's really going to stand out from being a lot darker with a lot deeper, richer colors. So even though it's exposed to the right, we're going to be concentrating on kind of recovering all of that color and contrast and detail within the image by going for that deeper, darker end result. Please give the video a like if you get a lot from it and if you enjoy this kind of material and you want me to keep making more. And remember to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any upcoming videos. So with that said, thanks again to Victor for this image and sending it in to me. Let's move over to Photoshop and get started. Okay, so I've opened up Victor's image in Lightroom, and this is the raw file that we're looking at the moment. And you'll notice it's very light, which is fine. It's actually good. The histogram there is exposed to the right, so we've got a lot of information in the image file, and we've got the highlight warnings turned on, and we can see here the sky is just a little bit overexposed over here, but it's actually not. I don't think it's going to be too overexposed that we can't recover it. So I think with this image, I think I would like to actually process it towards the darker end of the spectrum. So the first thing I'm going to do is just reduce the exposure here using the slider, and just by eye, I'm going to sort of gauge it to sort of the general look and feel of, in terms of brightness of how I want the image to end up. And so about here, minus 1.6, and that's just really stretched out the histogram. So, if we compare that to the original raw file up here, we can see as I move the exposure down, the histogram is shifting towards the left. We've still got those overexposed highlights, but I really think that we're going to be able to just, we may need to recover that a little bit in Photoshop later, but it's not too bad as it is. Now this image, there's some nice color in the sky around the lightning there, especially, and even this this sort of landscape in the front here. It's got a lot of potential warmth. I think the white balance at the moment is just a bit cool. So I think we're gonna, if we just increase the warmth of the white balance here, we're already going to see some nice, we're going to see a nice change and some nice warmth come through in there. And going to probably want to increase the magenta tint as well, just so that it doesn't go too green. So let's see. I'm just doing this by eye. There's no right or wrong here because there would be a color cast in the scene. So there's no, I wouldn't want to correct the white balance and neutralize all of the colors in the sky. So what I'm trying to do here is just get to a point where the image file preparation is done if you're following my 6-stage workflow, and then we can move into Photoshop for the rest of the 6 stages. I will just come down here and check these boxes, remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. And I think from here we're ready to move into Photoshop. So I'll just do that. Edit, right click on the image, edit in Photoshop 2020. Now, if you're watching this and you don't use Lightroom, then everything that I just did here in the develop panel in Lightroom, you're going to find those controls in the Camera Raw plugin. If you just open your raw file directly into Photoshop, it should open in the Camera Raw plugin first. So all of those controls that you just saw there are identical across both platforms. So I think the first thing, we're doing this a little bit out of order here in terms of the workflow, but the first thing that I really want to do is just recover those highlights there, and I'm not going to do that by just darkening it, because I think they are actually a bit overexposed and the detail would have been lost up there. So might just have to get a little bit creative from the start, actually. And I might try a couple of things. Let's just see what it looks like if I, well, let's just run through it and I'll show you. So I'll add a new layer and let's grab the clone stamp and let's pick part of the sky that's got a bit of texture in it. So, okay, let's use this bit down here. And I'm just going to clone across. Now this isn't going to look great to begin with, but I'm just, actually that's a bit too big. Yeah, this won't look perfect right away, but I'm just going to do something after I've done the cloning to see if I can blend it in a little bit more. So I'm just selecting the bit beneath and then cloning in from below. Maybe up here I can clone in from above a little bit. And then just, oops, let's undo those last two. Okay, I'm not sure about this top bit, that doesn't look great. Let's just do some more from underneath here. Too big again. Okay. Right, now obviously this looks not the greatest, but let's see what we can do by, first of all, let's reduce the opacity and then let's change the blend mode either to darken, well, still that looks a bit dodgy, multiply, even worse. Okay, let's reduce the opacity a bit more. Yeah, I think that darker bit at the top is actually causing problems. Let's just delete that. Just grab the eraser tool. Let's reduce the opacity a bit more. And I'll actually give it a bit of blur. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur. So this, okay, that'll do. Now let's change this now to darken. Okay, well, it's kind of filled it in. It's not great, but if you spend a bit more time, you could probably get a better result than that. But that's the first thing that I would try anyway. Maybe I can actually combine the second idea that I was going to use, which is to use my sun blur technique. So let's see what we can do by using both together. Otherwise, if it looks bad, then or if it doesn't help, then maybe we'll just use one or the other. So I've got this layer here. So I've added a second one. Just going to grab the brush tool. And with the brush tool selected, if I hold Alt or Option on the keyboard, I'm going to select like a light color from around this area. Actually, maybe I'll pick a light, warmer color over here from the lightning, and then we can add a bit of color into the scene from the left as well. Let's increase the brush size and 30% opacity. Let's see what happens if I just kind of brush across here and then leave it more, have it stronger over there on the left-hand side. So we're kind of creating a hazy effect that kind of masks out, well, not masks out, but it masks from our view the fact that we've got that overexposed weirdness over there with that sort of pretty rough clone job that I've added in. Let's reduce the opacity. I'm not sure about that. Maybe it still does need to be quite high on the opacity. Let's just try. Okay, I think by the time we add some contrasts back into the image in a minute, this is actually going to look pretty good. So anyway, there's the repair job. So that part of the sky there has now been filled in and kind of masked over with that pinky warm color that kind of creates a bit of an effect of some hazy sunlight leaking in from the side. So at this point, let's add, well, I'm not going to change any of the colors right now. So, that would be stage 3 of the workflow. Stage 4 would be to add some contrast and drama. So let's do that. So levels adjustment, this is my go-to technique. I'm just going to grab this control point here and move it to the right. Take this one and move it towards, the other way around. Move this one to the left and the middle one here to the right. And we see the contrast increase through the middle of the image there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe the shadows are a little bit dark. Actually, I'm going to do this selectively. So I'm just going to concentrate on what it's doing in the foreground and ignore the sky for the moment. So let's bring that to about here. I think that looks pretty decent. So that's a nice amount of contrast. And I'll just brush that in manually with a white brush. If I first invert this layer mask on the levels one, still got the brush selected. Got a white color in the foreground, and I'll just brush it through this kind of main section here to reveal that contrast effect. And the reason I'm going to brush it in like this is so that I can kind of avoid over darkening this ridge here, this dark ridge of dirt or rock. I think it's rock. So I'm just going to darken the lighter parts. Okay, it's kind of almost there. We have spilled over into the sky there a little bit, but I don't think that's really had a negative effect. Okay, let's do a similar thing now and look at what this is going to do to the sky. So another levels adjustment, increase the contrast again using this same technique, but looking at only what it's doing to the sky. And that's actually pretty good there. So let's do the same thing. Let's invert the mask. Let's Command or Control I to turn the mask from black to white to black. And let's just brush this in through the sky. So that's adding a bit of definition. That contrast is giving the clouds a bit more definition as well. Okay. And now, actually, I might just see if I can tweak this again a little bit more now I've got that mask in place. So I don't want to go too bright there, but we probably can darken a little bit. Okay, we'll leave it there. Now, we could continue on this process, adding contrast. I think I will do one more contrast adjustment in the foreground. But this time I'm just going to concentrate on what it's doing to this kind of lighter sandy coloured part of the landscape. So let's brighten with this control point, let's darken with this one. Okay, that's looking quite nice throughout the whole image actually. But this foreground part here is a bit too dark, a bit too contrasty, and it's kind of blown those, some of the highlights out up here. So rather than brush this in, I think I'll just brush it out of those areas. Yeah, let's do that with Luminosity Mask to just brush this effect out of those overexposed highlights first. I'm going to use the panel here just so that I can do this a lot quicker than the manual way. If you don't use the panel, or if you want to see the manual way of creating these luminosity masks in Photoshop without the panel, then I'll include some links in the description for this video on YouTube. So yeah, just check the description out and there'll be some videos on how to actually create these luminosity masks if you're not familiar with how to do it, or if you don't use the panel. But for the sake of quickness, I'll just use the panel here to load a highlight selection. I will use a preview to see what I'm selecting. So I've got the previews turned on and I'm going to select the highlights 3. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, that's quite a good isolation there. I just want to kind of rub out this bright bit here and some of this top right corner. So I'll click Use Mask. So now I've got that selection active. I'm just going to switch to a black foreground color for my brush. I'm going to hide the marching ants, Command H. or Control H on a PC. I'm just going to brush into that area there, just over those highlights to bring a little bit of that detail back so that it doesn't go too bright. Just up here, and maybe just a smidge through the middle there. Okay, so just toggling the layer mask off and on. Hasn't made much of a difference, but it's these little subtle differences that all add up to a refined finished image. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but remove it from some of these darkest shadows. So I'll deselect my current active selection for the highlights, Command or Control D. And I'll just create a shadow selection. So let's start off with the shadows 3, see what that looks like. Okay, probably need to go deeper into the shadows, so I'll go with a 5 on the shadows selections there. Okay, that looks good. So yeah, that's creating some nice isolation into the deepest, darkest shadows. We can see the darkest shadows are represented as the brightest whites in this preview. So I'll click Use Mask, hide the marching ant, Command or Control H. And again with that same black brush, this time I'm just going to kind of brush through the foreground to mask this contrast out of those darkest shadows so that it doesn't kind of go too black. So just brushing through here a couple of times. And with this luminosity mask active, or with the selection active, it's going to allow us to make these brush strokes without having to get right up close to the edges of the light stuff that I don't want to be masking. So if I look at the mask now, Alt or Option, and click on the layer mask, we can see there that the dark parts, what we're seeing here, are the parts that are being masked out of this levels adjustment, and those are the darkest parts of the image. And it's allowed me to do that without having to kind of brush right up against the lighter parts that I don't want to be masking. So the net effect of this adjustment is a nice refined amount of contrast having been added. I'll just recover some more of these shadows down here. And I think that looks good for this adjustment. Okay, so moving on. At this point, I think we're probably ready to try an Orton effect layer. So this is something that's always worth giving a go because it can add a nice contrast boost and color boost to your image and gives a nice sort of glowing atmosphere to the scene. Especially with an image like this with a lot of kind of warmth and interesting color. So I won't run through the exact process to create an Orton effect. I've got a couple of videos that I'll link to in the description on YouTube. If you want to see how to create this manually, it's just a few extra steps, but for the sake of speed, I'm going to use the luminosity masking panel, which has got a button here where I can just click it and it will create the effect in just a couple of seconds. So yeah, my computer is running a little bit slow at the moment because I'm recording the video and working on this image. So in just a sec, that will create our nice Orton effect layer for us. And it's going to do that, and it's going to apply a black layer mask to the layer. So let's just invert that to see what it looks like with the effect unmasked. And that's actually really nice. It's a really nice effect. It's probably a bit too strong in the shadows and just in the highlights where we're potentially overexposing the sky. So let's just reduce the opacity a little bit just to see what that does, just to bring it back. Just to pull some of that effect back. So okay, opacity 50%. I think that's a nice amount there, but we still probably want to mask it out of these shadowy areas and also out of the brighter highlights. So in effect, what we want to do is apply a midtones mask to the Orton effect layer. And I'll just hit this M1 button. So that's going to add a midtones 1 layer mask to this layer automatically. So I'll do that and just click OK here. And it's going to generate the mask and load it into my layer for me. So let's see the effect that's had. And it's very subtle. It hasn't really done much in the highlights. So let's look at the mask. Yeah, it hasn't really excluded the highlights at all, just because I guess they still, even though they're the brightest parts of the shot, they're still technically midtones. So let's try, well, midtones 2. That's, yeah, this is just going to bring more and more of the effect. It's going to mask more and more of the effect out as I go deeper into the mid-tone selections here. So M2, I think that looks, yeah, that looks like it's removing a bit more of the sky. Let's try M3. Yeah, I think that looks good. So here we've got a mask that is isolating the midtones and masking out the brightest and the darkest parts of the shot. So yeah, that allows us to keep that softness of the effect without overexposing and underexposing shadows and highlights. And that probably gives us a bit more leeway to increase the opacity of the effect layer itself. So yeah, I think that looks really good actually. Now at this point we can start to do some dodging and burning, I think, to really draw attention to all of the business in this foreground section here, because I think that's really the hero of the shot, apart from obviously the lightning and the color in the sky there. First, however, I'm going to do that with some dodging and burning, but first, to help kind of really focus on this part of the shot, I think the image could actually use a bit of a crop. So there's a lot of sky, and especially above, like where I'm running the mouse through this part of the sky here, above here, there's a lot of sky that's not really adding a whole lot to this shot. So let's grab the crop tool. Now, depending on whether you want to keep the same aspect ratio or not, you can get creative with the crop tool here and kind of turn it into like a bit of a panoramic aspect ratio, or if I hold shift, it's going to just retain the correct shape. So let's stick with the regular shape for now and just bring it in so that, well, it's not quite that much maybe. Depending on how much you want to kind of stick to the rule of thirds. I'm not really that fussed, to be honest, about the rule of thirds. I think it can, an image can work with the horizon just through the center or just off center, depending on where everything else in the image is. I think the balance is pretty good if I leave it here. So let's apply that crop. And yeah, we've sort of focused right in on that middle part there, and I actually prefer this composition. So let's do the dodging and burning that I mentioned, just to really kind of enhance all the detail in the middle and the foreground here. Okay, select all, edit, copy merged, edit, paste, and that's going to give us a new a new copied merged layer to dodge and burn into. So let's grab the dodge tool first. I've got midtone selected, and I'll use an exposure on the brush of 20%, which is higher than I normally would. But I kind of, this process can take a while if I'm going really slow with lower exposures. So I just want to sort of make this as quick as possible, really. So let's brush with the dodge tool. And because a lot of this middle area here is kind of very stuck in the midtones, I want to make it pop a bit by brightening the lighter objects and darkening the darker sort of surroundings. So I'm just going to concentrate on these columns and making them kind of stand out a bit more from the background by doing just that. So I'm dodging these columns, and then in just a minute when I get to it, I will burn all the sort of areas in between the columns so that they kind of stand out more and there's more local contrast in those areas. So just bear with me, this can take a minute. Let's increase the exposure. Okay, let's go 30%. Now this is a lot higher than I normally would use, but I think we really need to get a move on because the video is quite long already. Okay, they're already starting to stand out, which is good. Now let's just reduce the opacity or the exposure back down to 20%, and now let's just have a look over here at some of the edges of this, I'm not sure what you even call it, hills I guess. Just kind of enhance the edges of these hills here just to make them stand out a bit. Now let's grab the burn tool and we'll do the same thing but in reverse. So we're going to darken all the bits and pieces in between these columns that I've just brightened. Okay, this is quite a tedious process, but these are the things that really help us push an image up a few percentage points. So just enhancing the shadow contrast, or not the shadow contrast, but the contrast between the shadows and the highlights. All right, let's see what that looks like if I toggle this off and on. So here's before and here's after, and you can see they're definitely standing out and they appear to pop a lot more than they do in the before version. And yeah, Victor, for you, when you're processing this image, I would concentrate on doing this. And yeah, this is going to be the thing that makes the difference for this particular shot. Just really making those foreground columns stand out. But with that said, I won't continue on and spend the next 20 minutes just doing this same process, just perfecting it. But hopefully this is enough to give you the idea of what to do here. Which leaves me with probably just one more thing that I want to do, which is maybe just add a bit of a contrast vignette, just darkening the sort of lighter sandy part of this foreground here. So I'll do that with the curves adjustment. Now, a contrast vignette, so a regular vignette, if you're going to use a layer mask to brush it into the image, would just involve darkening the image and then inverting the mask and then brushing with the brush to brush into the top and around the edges and darken the bits you want to darken. But contrast vignette, the difference is as well as darkening, we're actually reducing the shadow contrast in the image or in those brushed in parts of the image by just lifting this shadow point here. So not only is it darkening it, but it's kind of leveling out and making that line in the curve between these 2 points, which is basically the shadows, and it's making it lower contrast as well as darker. So that's just another subtle kind of little visual thing that can help. And with that said, I think this image is pretty much there in terms of all of the techniques I would use. Now, like I said, Victor, for yourself, you probably want to just go a little bit further with the contrast and with that dodging and burning. But otherwise, I think, this for me is pretty close to where I would want to bring this image in processing if it were my own. So with that said, I'll sign this video off. And if you're watching this and you want to submit any images to me for consideration for an upcoming video, then I'll put a link to the submission form in the video description here on YouTube. And that'll be along with some other links to other videos of techniques that I kind of brushed over here a little bit quickly. And with that said, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you next time.